The room was silent. Too silent. On a monitor buried beneath post-it notes and half-drained coffee cups, a small red icon blinked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashing. Just blinking like a heartbeat. One click. That's all it took. At 2:17 a.m., the cloud storage system flagged something unusual. An outbound data transfer moving terabytes of information at impossible speed. From a server that should have been dormant. No one was supposed to be logged in. Not from that IP. Not from that country. By the time the morning shift arrived, the cloud had become a storm. Hundreds of files were missing. Sensitive data, everything from tax records and passport scans to confidential blueprints and even personal therapy logs, had vanished. The internal security dashboard was a wasteland of error messages and connection timeouts. Someone had broken into the cloud, not just to peek, but to steal. And the question no one wanted to answer echoed in the air like static. What else was hiding in there? Welcome to a story that began with a single login and ended in digital devastation. In this investigation, you'll uncover a real-world cybercrime that reveals the dark underbelly of the very systems we trust most, cloud storage. You'll learn how illicit data found a home in places meant to be secure, who put it there and why, how the attackers managed to exploit the very architecture designed to keep them out, and most terrifying of all, how easily it could happen again. Before the breach made headlines, before the investigators traced the signal halfway around the world, before the government scrambled to rewrite its policies, there was just one man staring at a terminal and making a choice. It started in Frankfurt, Germany. A mid-sized data center run by a third-party cloud infrastructure provider had just signed on a major new client, an international logistics firm operating across Europe, Asia, and parts of the Middle East. The company dealt with customs data, cross-border shipping manifests, and identity documentation. Digitizing operations meant migrating to the cloud. Faster, smarter, cheaper. The transition was overseen by a team of engineers, bright, overworked, stretched thin. One of them, Daniel Kraus, was in charge of configuring the security parameters for the cloud access APIs. But with deadlines looming and executives demanding speed, shortcuts were taken. Keys were hard-coded. Logs weren't encrypted. And one backup folder, the most sensitive, was left exposed with a simple misconfigured permission setting. It didn't take long for someone to find it. Unbeknownst to the team, one of the contractors hired for auxiliary software support had been compromised. His personal laptop was infected with a remote access Trojan, delivered through a phishing email disguised as a cloud certification update. When he opened it, the payload didn't activate right away. It waited, listening, mapping the network, watching for credentials. Once it had what it needed, the malware pivoted. It crawled through VPN tunnels and API calls until it reached the staging server, where test files were stored alongside production backups. There, it found a gold mine, not just customer data, but something more. Hidden inside the cloud folder was a strange file archive, encrypted, masked with legitimate-looking names. But when forensic teams would later break it open, the contents would stun them. There were videos, grainy, disturbing, clearly illegal. Financial records linked to darknet vendors. Export documents bearing the logos of companies under international sanctions. And metadata tracing it all back to cloud storage nodes registered to offshore shell corporations. This wasn't just a data breach. The cloud was being used as a smuggling route. As the stolen data flowed outward, the attackers used legitimate cloud APIs to fragment the files, bouncing them through distributed microservices hosted in other countries. To the naked eye, the traffic resembled normal system updates. But it wasn't. It was an exfiltration in plain sight. When the breach was discovered, the logistics firm froze. Not only were they compromised, they now held evidence of illegal content they hadn't even known existed. It became clear someone had been using their cloud infrastructure to store and move illicit data, and no one knew for how long. The investigation kicked off quietly. German authorities coordinated with Europol's cybercrime center, while the company brought in a private cybersecurity firm based in the UK, specialists in cloud forensics. The task was daunting. They had to determine which parts of the system had been accessed, how the intrusion occurred, and, most critically, whether the company had unknowingly become complicit in the distribution of criminal content. The private firm, Codex Intelligence, assigned its lead investigator, Maya Vance, a former signals analyst for British intelligence turned cyber investigator. She moved quickly, cloning the affected servers, tracing access logs, and analyzing metadata for anomalies. And it wasn't long before patterns began to emerge. The attackers had operated using automated scripts, relying on open-source tools like rclone to sync files from staging environments to remote nodes. But every automation leaves a fingerprint. Vance found one in the form of a mistyped directory name, one that matched a known alias used by a cybercriminal syndicate called Obsidian Phoenix. Obsidian Phoenix wasn't new. The group had been on Interpol's radar for over 5 years, suspected of trafficking in stolen intellectual property, forged credentials, and classified media. They specialized in hiding in legitimate systems, cloud infrastructures, open Git repositories, even university servers. And their calling card was always the same. Nothing was ever stored in one place. As Vance dug deeper, she noticed something chilling. The Illicit archive hadn't just passed through the cloud. It had been there for weeks, quiet, hidden, organized into folders mimicking software development pipelines. It meant one thing. Someone inside the company had probably known. That's when suspicions turned inward. The contractor whose laptop had been the initial entry point was brought in for questioning, but his digital footprint told a different story. He wasn't the source. He was collateral. The real traitor, it seemed, was higher up, a system administrator with elevated privileges who had been quietly logging in during off hours, bypassing logging systems entirely, using his access to mirror storage buckets and inject encrypted packages. His name was Lukas Feld, a quiet man, private, efficient. Background checks had cleared him with no red flags. But Vance found something in his audit history, a repeated connection to a Tor relay during scheduled server maintenance. Curious, she cross-referenced the times with known darknet activity windows. They matched perfectly. Authorities moved in. Feld was arrested in a dawn raid at his apartment in Leipzig. His hard drives were packed, labeled, and half already encrypted. Investigators later found cryptocurrency cold wallets linked to darknet transactions. Over 12 terabytes of illicit material were recovered. But what disturbed them most wasn't just the data. It was how easy it had been to hide it. Feld had used containerized cloud instances, ephemeral virtual machines that spun up, transferred data, then shut down, leaving almost no trace. The cloud provider, due to privacy compliance regulations, had no visibility into the content unless explicitly flagged. It was a perfect storm: trusted credentials, misconfigured permissions, and legal blind spots. The arrest made headlines. Cloud engineer caught trafficking illicit data through corporate infrastructure. But the damage couldn't be undone. The logistics company's reputation collapsed. Contracts were pulled. Lawsuits followed. Their executive team was investigated for negligence. Investors fled. And behind closed doors, global discussions ignited over the regulatory gaps in cloud data oversight. Governments realized something they hadn't wanted to admit. The cloud wasn't just a storage solution. It was a new frontier. And like any frontier, it had shadows. Criminals weren't hacking into systems. They were hiding inside them. Vance later testified before a parliamentary committee. She warned of the growing threat of cloud laundering, using trusted digital platforms to store, obscure, and transmit illegal data under the guise of normalcy. "It's not about breaking in," she said. "It's about blending in." Even now, digital investigators wonder how many more instances like this exist. How many files pass through legitimate systems every day, harmless in appearance, malicious in intent? How many cloud engineers have access to the keys of empires they barely understand? In the aftermath, new compliance frameworks were proposed, greater visibility tools for cloud administrators, mandatory audit logs for all elevated access. But enforcement was slow. Technology moved faster than policy, and while companies rushed to review their cloud security, few dared to ask the question aloud: who else is using our storage? The story of Lukas Feld and Obsidian Phoenix didn't end with a trial. Other members of the group were never identified. The data they moved, much of it, was never recovered, and the techniques they used have now become templates for others. Tutorials circulate in obscure forums, whispered methods for making your own invisible cloud tunnels. We trust the cloud with everything, our work, our memories, our secrets. But as this case reveals, trust can be a vulnerability. The cloud hides more than backups and spreadsheets. It can hide monsters. And sometimes those monsters wear the face of your colleague, your employee, your friend. So before you upload your life to a server farm half a world away, ask yourself, who else might be watching? Who else might be using the very tools you depend on? And in a world where data is currency, control, and power, are you really the only one with the key? If this story made you rethink your digital safety, then subscribe to Cybercrime Exposed, unmasking the dark side of the digital world. Like this video if it kept you on the edge of your seat, and tell us in the comments, if the cloud is the safest place for your data, why are criminals hiding there too?